I've done quite well for myself as an adult, but when I was younger, we were very poor. In middle school, I lived in government housing projects that were like little one-level apartments with two apartments sharing a wall each, all spaced apart. There were woods directly behind the cluster of apartments, with no gate in between, but no one ever went into the woods, which I learned the reason for due to this incident. These apartments were poorly made, and the windows could easily be popped in and out, never mind a lock. The front door was somewhat sturdy, but with good kick, it could have easily been opened. My dad was pretty stocky and a bodybuilder type, so I had a full sense of security and would leave my window blinds open at night, as my room faced some trees that would blow in the wind. I love nature and wasn't afraid of the dark, so I liked watching the trees as I fell asleep. Our apartment's front door was facing this woods, as was my friend behind ours, with our building blocking their view. As you would walk in the front door, the hallway's on the left. My room was at the end of the hallway on the right. My big window that took up most of the wall was on the left, and my bed was sideways facing both walls, so I could lay on my side and watch the trees. The woods were about a field away facing our front door, so I couldn't see it from my room. This was just a small area of trees and vegetation. One night, I woke up feeling a sense of unease, and through my sleepy haze, made out the figure of a large man standing at my window watching me sleep with total confidence, not caring at all if he was seen. He was in a big coat and looked quite burly and average to taller height. It was black in my room and outside, just barely illuminated by moonlight. I just cracked open my eyes and I froze once I realised what I was seeing. I kept my eyes closed as possible, just enough to peer at him in the darkness, and literally rolled out of my bed to the side, not facing the window, and shouted for my dad, who was across the hall with both our doors open as I crawled out. Not the smartest, but I was a dumb 12-year-old. He hadn't gone to sleep yet and was in my room in a heartbeat as the guy took off. He went to run out the front door yelling threats as well, which probably wasn't smart, but the guy was gone. I truly believe he never came in before or after this, just due to my dad's sheer size and build, but I'll never know. A few nights later, I was spending the night at my friend's, who lived directly behind us with the same layout. Her room was the first room on the left, with her window facing the woods / our apartment blocking the view. Her sister's was the second on the left, and her mum and toddler sister were in the room on the right, like mine in my own apartment. We finished watching Dave Chappelle and went to do one another's hair in her room, with her older sister helping us, while her mum and little sister went to bed. Not long after, we heard some screaming from her mum's room and heavy stomping feet. Her older sister swung open the door to the room where we was in, and there's just a flash of a huge white man in his 30s and 40s running down the hall towards the living room and front door, and her mum behind him with a butcher's knife hacking the air and screaming bloody murder. Dude flew out the door towards the woods while her mum locked her door and called the cops. This man had the audacity to pop open the window and crawl into the bed that was pushed against the window just slightly under it, not realising this woman was a whole Amazon warrior who slept with a butcher's knife and would clearly wake up to protect her baby. She was quick and had slashed him, though I'm not sure of the damage since I was ushered home directly after. The cops went into the woods looking for him and found him and another man quite similar to him living and hiding out there together. They were also responding to a call from a frantic mother whose little girl had been taken that day as well from our housing units, and they found her with those creeps. She had been there all day and night with them. She was around 3 or 4. They were taken to jail, and that's the last I heard of it, as the adults didn't let us in on their adult conversation. The poor little girl was probably traumatised, and I hope she'd been able to heal. I can't believe what could have happened if my friend's mum hadn't been there so quick and slept with a weapon. Or if he had decided to fight instead of run. I still don't understand why he didn't try and overpower her, but it's possible that she injured him. After this, my dad explained to me how sometimes drug addicts or homeless people would hang out in these woods, Okay, so this was between year 8 and 10. I have a bad memory. When this happened, it was in my old house. For reference, my bedroom was very small. My bed was on the side of the wall, and if I had turned to my left, I could see my door. Basically, I woke up one night at 3 to 4 am for no reason, and I was sweating so much. It's not like I had a bad dream though. In fact, I don't even think I dreamt at all. Anyway, my mum has 3 different coloured tops for her work: purple, red and black. The purple top was new and she rarely ever wore it to work. Yes, this is relevant, trust me. So I woke up and I saw that my door was slightly open and the hallway light was on. I saw what appeared to be my mother staring right back at me, but it wasn't her. She had no mouth or nose, just eyes. I stared back and slightly yelled out, "Ma, what are you doing?" She didn't respond. "Mum!" And then I hear her say, "What?" but from her bedroom. So what on earth was that thing staring at me? And like I said before, my mum rarely ever wore that purple top, but the thing at the door was wearing it. After that, I'm not sure how, but I fell right back to sleep and I woke up before my mum at around 6 am. The hallway light was off, but I so clearly remember it being on, otherwise I wouldn't have seen the thing. After that day, I come back home, and so does my mum. Guess what top she's wearing to work that day? Purple. Ever since that day, I can still honestly imagine the way it looked like a human, but it wasn't. This happened about 6 or 7 years ago on a summer's night. I was at my friend's house one night, and there was 3 of us. We decided that we wanted to go ding-dong ditching at around 11:30 or so. The neighbourhood that he lived in is very dark at night, as there's no street lights, only torches on street corners that are only there so cars didn't drive off the road. My friends and I have gone ding-dong ditching a few times before, so we knew that we should relieve our bladders before heading off. We were already outside at this point, so we relieved ourselves in the bushes. One of the friends and I had already finished, so we stood towards the end of the driveway, talking, while the other friend was closer to the house still. While we talked, I faced out towards the street while my friend faced me. As we talked, I saw a tall, pure black figure running up the sidewalk across the street. It took me a second to process what I was seeing, but when I did, I must have shown an expression of shock because the friend I was talking to started running for the house right as I did. I saw the thing, and my friend said that he heard it running. The other friend near the house just ran inside because we did, and was in denial about everything. Details of this thing. It was very tall. I was probably 5'10" at the time, and could tell this thing was significantly taller than me, probably 6'2" at least. It ran on 2 legs, and had the physique of a lean runner. I know I said that this neighbourhood was very dark, but this thing was black, pure black, and there was no sign of it wearing clothing. If it was wearing clothes, it had to be some skin-tight outfit that was black. Too fast for me to call it human. I refer to this thing as it because I truly don't believe that this is human, as much as it's shaped like one. I ran track and cross country at the time, so I could judge how fast it was running, and there's not an ounce of doubt in my mind that tells me it could possibly be a human running that fast. It was also running uphill. My friends, even the one who heard it running, didn't believe what I saw, but one night, later the same summer, my friend had a large gathering of boys who all went ding-dong ditching. Sadly, I was not present on this occurrence. The boys made it far down the neighbourhood when they saw it, a dark figure running that fits my description. They were much further away than I was, so I take my description as the more accurate one. In their case, however, they saw it running back and forth across the street, running out of view, then back into view, then out again. We went out on other occasions, but never saw the thing again. Let me know if you have other questions, or would like me to talk to my friends about their observations. Thanks for reading. So, this was a few years ago at this point. I called an Uber to head to this beach club my parents and I were a part of from my house. The Uber driver picked me up and wouldn't stop talking to me about how he moved here from India. I don't mind, and I talked with him during the ride to be polite. He kept going down weird roads. Looking back, I think it was to talk to me for longer, but at the same time, he blamed it on his GPS, and I was too afraid to call him out on it. When he finally got to my destination, I said goodbye and left the car. Little did I know that he would park the car at the place where I asked him to drop me off at and followed me down to the beach. People at the beach saw him following me and said nothing. Looking back, it scared me to think of how easily he could have got away with this, even with how weird it must have looked. He found me on the beach and started talking to me. He wouldn't stop. He told me how pretty I was and how he was looking for a wife. I was too young and scared to feel like I could yell at him to go away. I just stood there hoping someone would notice how weird this looked and how scared I was. Then he leaves and drives away. Late that night, I get a notification that he found me on Facebook and tried to add me as a friend. I deleted the app and blocked him. Since then I only use Lyft. I tried to find the number to get him blocked from Uber, but there was no phone number to call.
This is not the scariest story, but it definitely creeped me the fuck out. For background, I'm a 20-year-old female. I matched with this guy on Tinder a while back. His name was Nick, and he seemed pretty cool, so I gave him my Snapchat. We talked a little, but it died out quickly. I didn't tell him the exact town I lived in, but the city about 10 minutes away, because it's a decent-sized city and has a big population of people, and I figured he wouldn't be able to find me by just knowing that bit of information. A few weeks ago, he started messaging me, and we made small talk. Everything seemed normal for a while up until New Year's Eve. The day before, he messaged me saying he was going to be in the area, the city I told him I was from, and asked if I wanted to meet for lunch. I told him possibly and I'd let him know. The next night I had a New Year's Eve party with a small group of my friends. I spent most of the day getting ready and was not looking at my phone. Around 7:30 I finally looked at Snapchat and saw that Nick had not only messaged me but called me. "Hey, I'm in," the name of the city. I responded telling him I was sorry and I just saw his message. He opened it within minutes and totally freaked out. He said something along the lines of, "Just to let you know, I'm really not interested in someone who can't even answer the phone when I drove 6 hours to see her." I looked at it in disbelief, and for a second I thought he was joking. I responded by asking him what he was talking about, and that he didn't just drive 6 hours to see me. He said that we had plans, and why else would he have driven up here? I was so confused because we never had plans. He told me that he was going to be in the area, which made me think he was here for work or to visit a friend. It's not uncommon for people to travel here for work. I explained this to him and told him that we did not have plans and that I didn't ask him to drive all that way for me. He told me he sat around for 2 hours waiting for me and brought me flowers. Again, I was confused because we never had a planned time or place to meet, and he never confirmed plans. You don't make plans by just telling someone you're going to be in the area. I apologised but told him that we never had plans. He told me to make it up to him and I had to drive up and see him tomorrow. Yeah, fuck that. I remembered that I had my location shared on Snapchat, so he easily could have shown up at my house. I turned off my location but kept him on Snapchat in case he tries to show up at my house. Luckily, I've not heard from him since. My dad's a retired police officer and had a gun, so I'm not afraid to use it.
I'm not a great storyteller, and this isn't exactly terrifying, but this is a chilling story my mum told me, and she says she doesn't know what Reddit is, so here I am. My mother Diane, her ex-husband Tim, and my 2 older siblings who were young at the time, my sister was 5 and my brother was a baby, went on a family camping trip planned by Tim, who happened to be an alcoholic. They pitched a tent at a campground in Goshen, Massachusetts. My mum can't remember the name of it now. It's a town in the western part of the state she says reminds her of Maine. They had s'mores with my sister, and Tim got more and more drunk as the night progressed. My siblings were the first 2 to fall asleep, and Tim wasn't far behind as she recalls. Long after the fire burnt out, sometime after midnight, My mum was the only one awake in the tent. Within a quarter of a mile or so, she could hear what sounded like a large group of mostly men speaking in unison in the distance. It sounded like they were doing some kind of chant, and my mum decided she would stay awake for a few more hours after that. Nothing bad happened to them, and I'm thankful for that, but since then, my mum has tried to look up any satanic groups or cults in Goshen area around the 1990s, and has heeded no results. Anyone else have an experience like this in the area? When I was in high school, my friends and I got really into exploring abandoned places. We used to research places along the east coast and drive during the summertime to check them and take cool pictures. This one time, a kid we knew in my buddy's class told him about this abandoned mental asylum in Maryland that was really cool because, unlike most places, it was a 5-building complex with a large centre building that was 3 stories tall. I forgot the name, but if anyone knows what we're talking about, feel free to share. Naturally, this piqued our interest, so that weekend we told our parents we were going on a fishing trip to Maryland, and 6 of us road trip to see this place. We started out by checking out the smaller building in the complex when we first got there, and slowly made our way around the area to look out for the security. To give a sort of layout of the asylum, all of the buildings connected to each other, aside from the main building and the church that was behind it. So as we entered the first building, we decided to pull a Scooby-Doo and split up and cover more ground. I got paired with a kid in the group that didn't really want to be there to begin with, and we went down to the basement of the building. As we went down, I saw that there was a crude doorway near the staircase that was out of place from the other large hallways upstairs. I convinced the guy I was paired with to check it out on the condition that I went first. The layout of this room was like a ramp, so if you kept walking back, you will get closer to the ceiling and a lot darker. We had one flashlight, which I gave to my friend. I was using my phone flashlight. So as I walked in, I naturally got drawn to walk straight back while my buddy went to the left side instead. I remember saying to him as we were inside, "Damn, this place smells like shit." And when I turned around, the guy I'm with speed walks towards me and says that we need to leave now. Thinking he was just scared, I didn't argue with him and we left, and I didn't think much of it for the rest of our time there. Later that week, my friends and I are at a party and we're telling people about this asylum we just explored. I start telling people about the main building, and the guy I was paired with comes up to hear what we're talking about. As I start talking about the basement and the room we were in, he pauses the story. He then tells me the reason he made us leave so fast was because, as I was saying that the place smelled like shit, he saw that the left side of the room had furnaces and piles of old shoes and white medical patient clothes. We were in the morgue, and I had no idea. My grandfather has always been a superstitious man. He was born out west in upper Arizona, off of any city limits, not far from Antelope Canyon. When he was in his teens, his family moved to southern, rural Virginia to go live and help out with the family farm. The farm has been in our family for generations, since my ancestors came to America. They were promised a great sum of land if they were to help in battle. With this sum of land, they became one of the founding families in Blacksburg, VA, a small city in one of the southern Virginia's mountainous valleys. Though the majority of the original land had been sold to the city of Blacksburg, the farm still sits on the side of the mountain in a great forest, roughly 10 miles off the city limits. Growing up, my grandfather had told me many stories about his time in the woods as a young boy. He would tell me of human-like creatures that moved on all fours, but the second you noticed it was there, it would stand up and walk on its hind legs as if it had been doing that the whole time. He told me stories of graveyards that appeared during the day but vanished at night. He also told me of creatures coming up to the house and peering in windows, watching behind trees. He would explain cattle being slain at random times of the year with no explanation. There are no bears there, and there was no way coyotes could tear apart cows in that manner. He'd tell me of hearing voices of his wife, his son, his mother coming from the woods when he was working with cattle, although there was never anyone there. My father tells my grandfather knows more than what he's telling, but it scares him to talk about. He could never tell us exactly what the creatures were, just that they were there, and never go into the woods alone. He told me he had been stalked by creatures that came in different forms his whole life. I believed all of this to be an old man's tale until recently. I'm 18 now and female. I live with my parents in Midwestern North Carolina. However, I'm moving to the rural North Carolina Appalachian Mountains now. I'm not a religious person, but I do believe in the paranormal. I consider myself to be a spiritual person. I'm interested in differing energy, bonding with animals, crystals, and manifestation. Through my spiritual journey, I have only dealt with good energy, up until recently. Last month, I was sitting in the car with a few of my friends. I had come home from college to hang out with my hometown friends. It was about 11 PM, and we were sitting in a parking lot along the woods with the car completely off, just talking. We went silent for a bit. Suddenly, I became overwhelmed by a sense of heaviness. I was uneasy. I scanned the tree line, and that's when I saw them. Two animals. They looked like dogs. They were both standing very still and looking at us. I asked my friends if they saw them too. No one else could see them. After 10 minutes of trying to point them out, I gave up, but the dogs kept watching. Other things like this have occurred too. One time I was riding in the car down a desolate wooded road at night with one of my guy friends. All of a sudden, I saw a person in the headlights walking across the road, as if it couldn't see us coming down. I yelled for my friend to watch out, but he told me no one was there. I looked around, and there was nobody there. I could have sworn I watched someone walk across the road. I once was up late and making a snack to watch Netflix, as many people my age do. I was close to the blinds at night, because what goes on at night outside scares me. We live in a quaint neighbourhood surrounded by miles of forest. I always make sure to close the blinds and lock the doors. This particular night, my parents had warned me to make sure all the doors were locked, as people had been knocking on our door in the middle of the night. When my parents would go check it, no one would be there. While I was closing the blinds then this night, I saw something. Two deer. They were staring at me from across the street into my house. I could see their eyes twinkling from the light off the houses. With a pit in my stomach, I shut the blinds. I knew I was being watched at this point. I've started wearing an amethyst necklace to bring protection. I wondered if my manifestations had brought about negative energy, but I had never been manifesting negative things or stripping people away from their free will. Mostly I'd been manifesting that I'd be able to transfer out of my current school and be able to go to school in the North Carolina mountains. This came true, and Thursday I'll move to my new school. I'm worried that whatever tormented and followed my grandfather for so long is now following me. I'm not sure what to do and how I'll protect myself from it. I'm not sure how others aren't able to see the things I've been seeing. Please, if you have any advice, help me out. My parents always claimed there was an unknown spirit that followed us around from house to house. We called him George. I think he was something more than a regular spirit, and fed off my parents' negative energy. My dad saged the house, with us not inside, which was the wrong way. He said that as he was pushing the evil out, something growled right in his face. A week later, I started seeing a shadow man. He appeared at the end of the hall one time, and my mum didn't notice, and walked right past him. The shadow barged in while I was taking a shower. I saw it past the curtain and yelled at him to leave. which the shadow went right back where it came from. Since I moved out, I don't see him anymore. I cut contact with my parents for good reasons. I don't feel safe there, and I feel that that house is a trap for negative energy and anger. I will never go back and see them again. Sorry ahead of time for any format issues. I'm posting this on a cell phone. So for context, I'm a 22-year-old male, and I live in a large city in the Midwest. Now, I drive Lyft while putting myself through trade school. I drive for other similar companies, but that's besides the point. I have many horror stories from all those as well, but I'll tell those another time. It was Christmas Eve 2020. I was out running Lyft for a few hours before heading to my mum's with my new baby and wife. Nothing special going on for the night, just the usual. I get a ride request. It was a pickup from this kinda lower income apartment complex. No big deal. I arrive and I find my passenger. He has all his belongings, several boxes and stuff. Now, my car is a 2006 Chevy Impala, so it's not too big. We get all his stuff loaded up, barely, and we're on our way. During the ride, he's crying, saying that his girlfriend was cheating on him, and he had walked in on them earlier that night. He couldn't stay there because it was her name on the lease. So I was taking him to a hotel. Now, in my city, we have a street that is known for having vices. Hookers, drugs, gangs, weapons, and shady motels. The works. We get to the motel, and he asked me to wait for him to check in and get his key. No problem, man, I say. I'll confess, I break the rules a little when it comes to Lyft. I have a gun hidden in a concealed holster secured to the underside of my driver's seat for protection. Reason being, driving Lyft and other contract apps, I've had knives and guns pulled on me, as well as people who've tried to fire me, rob me, and all kinds of other things. But like I said, another time. This motel was on a street I mentioned before. Homeless people were everywhere. There was a dude on the far corner of the complex that still had a needle in his arm, passed out against a building. I'm a big fan of true crime and horror narration, so I'm on edge. He gets his key. The whole motel is ground level, so to help the guy out, I drive to his door. As I mentioned before, he has a lot of stuff, so I started helping unload his stuff. While on my second trip of getting stuff, I saw a guy come out of a room just to the south of my car, followed by two ladies. They came up to the room I was next to, not my passenger. One of the ladies pounded on the door, then opened it. That's when I saw a guy raise a shotgun up out of his long coat and storm into the room. The two ladies followed him, slamming the door behind them. Following, I heard a lot of yelling and shouting. I was just waiting for shots to ring out. Out of nowhere, my passenger came up behind me. "I can take this, man. Go ahead and take off. Have a Merry Christmas." And he gave me a cash tip. I didn't even notice he took boxes out of my hands or slid a $5 bill into my pocket. I knew what may have been going on down in that room. I had to leave, or at least get to where I could get my gun. I know the guy and the ladies saw me, and I know they knew I saw the gun. I had to get out of there. You know, no witnesses. I got in my car and sped away quickly. I got a block or so away and called the cops. I handed them every detail. After I got off the phone with the police, I signed out a Lyft. I hadn't made much money, but I was done. I got a call later that night. The cops investigated. They never found the gunman or the woman. They never answered the door I saw them come out of. And the occupants of the room they went into said nothing happened, and that I was full of shit. Well, I know what I saw. So, back in November 2020, I was in and out of hospital with testicular torsion 8 times altogether, because why permanently fix a medical issue when you can temporarily fix it, I guess. And on my last time at one of the hospitals, I called a taxi to go home, but it would take about 30 to 40 minutes to get to me because it was a Saturday in the city. Since there was going to be a bit of a wait, I decided to sit down in a garden/bench area in front of the hospital. It was 3 AM, about 0 degrees Celsius, and I had been awake for 36 hours at that point. My taxi was on its way, and I just sat cross-legged on the bench, headphones on, and nicotine keeping me alive. Everything was fine until after 10 minutes. I noticed a guy very clearly walking directly towards me. He was stumbling a bit, so I assumed he was drunk, and he got level with me. He stopped right in front of me and said something that I didn't hear. I looked up and said, "What?" Sorry, I had music on. As I pulled them off, he looked at me dead in the eye and just said, "I could effing batter you right now." Of everything I was expecting him to say, that wasn't on the list. So, caught off guard, I tried to summon him with humour by saying, "I don't doubt it," which did work, thank God, because he would have absolutely pulled me into the ground. And every time I said something similar, he'd just say, "I could batter you. I want to deck you right here, right now. And I could take you in a fight," just to recall a few of them. After his anger toned down, he sat on the bench next to me and started generally drunk rambling about his family and his friends, and very specifically, his best friend's girlfriend that he was having an affair with. Then he pointed out my shoes, saying, "Those are nice, mate. Can I have them?" Obviously, I said no firmly, but not aggressively. Then said thanks and told him about the fact that I've got them on the sale. He said, "Can I touch them?" which was immediately a big red flag. I politely declined, and he started rubbing my shoe anyway. I was still sitting cross-legged on the bench. Then, in one swift movement, he grabbed my ankle, pulled my entire leg up to his face, and put the entire toe of my size 11 Converses in his mouth. At which point, while sitting in stunned silence, I started desperately looking around, and I could see the hospital police walking over. The officer asked if we were here together. He said yes. I said no. The officer then asked if he was a patient. I said yes. He said no. I told the officer I was just waiting for my taxi, and the guy rambled something I couldn't really make out to the officer, who suggested he move along. The guy stood up, gave me a handshake, and walked off into the night. The officer obviously asked if I was okay, and I told him what happened. He was just as confused as I was. After that, my taxi was due in 5 minutes, so I went and stood on the opposite side of the hospital to where the taxi rank was. I asked some friends who are familiar with a lot of drugs and what he could have been on, and they all unanimously said meth, and the shoe thing was probably just a fetish. Random shoe butter outside the hospital. Let's never meet again. This took place around the corner from my house when I was about 7 to 10 years old. There was a food place around the corner, and I'd run around to get their milkshakes every now and then. One day, my parents left to go out somewhere, just as the sun was about to set. I called my mum to tell her I'd be leaving around the corner, and she said it was fine. The previous day, I'd gotten a deep bruise on my arm from school, and I was wearing a t-shirt that day, as it was just turning summer. I didn't know how to tie shoelaces back then, so I just thought I'd leave them untied for the moment. I was walking around the corner when a tall, tired-looking man in his 40s to late 50s came up to me and asked to tie my laces. I assumed that he was Indian from what I could tell at the time. He spoke with an accent, and I think maybe English wasn't his first language. I thought it was strange, but I let him, not knowing any better. After he was finished, he stared at me for a moment. He looked at the bruise on my arm, grabbed my arm and examined it. "Oh no, you need a bandage. Come with me and we'll find your parents." Hearing this and becoming uncomfortable, my shy young self mumbled, "It's fine." He pulled out his phone and brought up pictures of his son while still grabbing onto me. I was becoming increasingly freaked out, especially because I was very introverted when I was young. "This is my son. You can trust me," he said. At that point, I knew something didn't feel right. I had a feeling that I had to leave as soon as possible. He was standing in the direction of my house, blocking the way, so running home wasn't an option. I also was smart enough not to show him where I lived. A few people were walking past without intervening. My parents never taught me stranger danger, so all I could do was hope someone intervened. A family walked by, going into the house from behind where the man was holding me by my arm. What makes me angry to this day is that no one intervened. Not even the family walking behind me. I kept repeating, "It's fine, really it's fine," over and over, but no one spoke up. My heart was beating fast and I didn't know what to do. I pulled my arm away and started walking to the food place as it was my only option. I didn't look behind me, I just kept walking. When I got to the food place, which took about 5 minutes, I ordered my milkshake and waited for it to be made. I was almost in tears, barely holding it together. The man had followed me all the way to the small food place. He was standing at the open entrance staring at me. I really felt like I was about to be kidnapped. My heart was racing, I was sweating, and I was in shock. I did my best to hide my trembling voice when giving the cashier a thank you and reluctantly took my milkshake. "Hey, OP," a voice behind me said. I turned around to see my neighbour. She was a woman in her 60s and was very nice from our select few interactions. I didn't know her that well, but my parents did. She whispered to me, "Is that man following you? Do you want me to walk you home?" Looking back now, she quite possibly saved me from being kidnapped. It even saved my life. The man was scared off at that point and walked away. My neighbour walked me home and asked me a few questions. I answered slowly, trying to gather my thoughts and catch my breath. When we were nearly at my house, my neighbour asked if she should come in with me to tell my parents. I said no, as I was in shock, and I especially didn't want my parents to find out, fearing they would get really mad at me. My parents were home at that point and greeted me as I came inside. I said hello quietly and rushed to my room. I sat on my bed and recounted what happened over and over. Would the neighbour tell my parents anyway? I hesitated for a while, then went up to my mum's room while she was watching TV. I asked if I could tell her something, and she turned off the TV. I was halfway through explaining what happened when I broke down in tears. She got very mad, and I immediately thought telling her was a bad idea. She rushed me downstairs to where my dad and three of my brothers were watching a movie together. My mum explained what happened, and everyone got really mad. My dad was shouting at me, frantically asking questions. After answering, I went to my room and sobbed in my bed before falling asleep. I found out later that my parents went to the police station. My parents explained later that they weren't mad at me, they were mad at my attempt to kidnap her. The situation could have been handled a lot better by everyone looking back. I had to describe to my dad what he looked like, and I went to the police station to give a statement the next day. My neighbour also made a statement. My mum had a therapist come to the house for a day to find out if I'd suffered anything that could cause trauma. Luckily I didn't, but I was afraid to leave my house alone for months. I will always remember that day. They never caught the guy. Maybe he was worried that a 7 to 10-year-old was walking without parents and wasn't causing any harm. Looking back, my opinions have changed. I'd like to hear what you all think. I've been living in Prague for about a year. I taught 3rd grade at a bilingual school during the day and worked door security for a tourist bar at night. Weekends I would get off work around 3 or 4 depending on how busy it was, at which point I would take the tram from the city centre to the JCP where my apartment was located. At the time I was 22 years old and had short black hair with round glasses, and this is important. One night I stood at the back of the tram with headphones in despite my phone being dead. They were like a security blanket to prevent me from socialising with drunk English speakers that populated the city centre at that time of night. This group of 7 guys looking to be between 25 to 30 get on being loud and drunk. I'm okay with accents, and these guys were definitely British, probably there for a stag do. I ignore them until I hear this conversation. I'd F that Harry Potter looking girl, like she'd F you, mate. Like I'd give her a choice, and then raucous laughter and high-fiving all over this little joke. How can you tell that's a girl? One way to find out, isn't there? And then more laughter. I keep staring at my Kindle and acting like I couldn't hear them and I didn't speak English, but internally I was screaming in panic. My stop was only 2 away, and I figured I'd want to be as close to my flat as possible when I got off. So I sit there, ignoring and leering until the tram gets to my stop. I get off. I've got 3 blocks up and half a block over to get to my flat. They get off. That's fine, I live 2 blocks away from a very popular club and quite a few bars and hotels in the area. I rationalised to myself, they're not following me. I had a test, a stupid thing I did to see if people were walking behind me or were following me, and I crossed at weird places in the street, and they crossed too. I pick up my pace to be walking fast but not running. Their pace picks up and laughter emanates from the group behind me. I refuse to look back. I make the 3 blocks with them steadily closing the gap to me. I turn left and bolt, running as fast as I can, keychain with rock in my palm and building key between my thumb and pointer knuckle. I slam the door, and even though it locks automatically and doesn't have a turntable handle, I throw the deadbolt and continue running to my flat, where I also turn the deadbolt. I get to my room, which faces the street, and I curl up in the corner shaking as through my window I can hear, "Where'd that bitch go?" along with other things I'm not going to post. About 15 minutes later, I hear them go away. So yeah, you group of British boys, I won't even call you men, let's not meet. Edit. Thank you for the responses. Unfortunately, this isn't my only unfortunate story of this nature. I appreciate all the people standing by me. A true scary story of mine. Well, take for instance a young agender child, about 15 years old. That's me. Then make it 3 in the morning and give that child insomnia and paranoia. Stuff a pair of earbuds on them and put them outside near a train track, aimlessly walking around. That was where it started. I've always had really bad insomnia and paranoia, and on this particular night, I happened to be home alone. I woke up at around 2:30 with this god-awful feeling in my stomach that told me, get your coat, shoes and phone and get out as quietly as you can. You see, we've had issues with people entering the house, so I followed that gut instinct, and once I got outside I realised, oh my god, I'm bleeding. There was a fairly large gash on my arm that I'd just noticed. So I wrapped it as good as I could in my coat and started to head around to the front to get my bike. That was when I heard it. A noise that can only be described as screaming coming from inside the house. And I was able to pinpoint it to my room. Not just because the lights was on and there was a figure literally throwing my stuff around and yelling. I panicked, grabbed my bike and started riding away from the house. I did though stay long enough to figure out what it was yelling. Get back here. We don't live there anymore. In this context, I was about 7 or 8 at the time, and we were at a beach in North Carolina. The sun was going down, and my family and I were having fun, letting the waves hit us, as we were about to pack up and leave. But my mum let me stay in the water with my older brother for a bit before we left. My brother and I were having fun, before I felt something tug on my foot. At first, it felt like the current, so I didn't worry about it. Not even 10 seconds go by before I have something latch onto my right ankle and yank me underwater. The thing grabbed me and it felt scarily bony on my ankle, and it was like something was piercing my leg as I struggled to get back to the surface. I got about 15 feet out before I felt my brother grab my arm and yank me out of the water. Once I got out, I could see on my leg there were slashes and bleeding in my leg where I felt the piercing. My mum chalked it up to rocks being in the water, but they weren't scrapes. It was almost like they were stabs. This happened around 2013. I was either 12 or 13 at the time. I'm the middle child of 3, and have been dubbed the responsible one for most of my life. On this night, I would be in charge of watching my siblings while my mum and grandparents went out. It wasn't often that my grandparents would leave the house, so when they did, they'd often be gone for the whole day. This was great in the eyes of my siblings and I, mostly due to the fact that they enjoyed whatever I cooked them, and we each got free time without the judgmental eyes of our very strict grandparents. After dinner, I decided to enjoy time outside my shared bedroom and take a seat in the living room. Now, if you were online frequently around this time, you would know this is when the creepypasta fandom was at its peak. I was, and still am 10 years later, a huge fan of scary stories online. Because of my hyperfixation at the time, I loved letting my imagination get the best of me. I often used my free time on Omegle in the hopes that I would find friends with similar interests. This happened often, though of course as a naive young girl on the sketchy site, I often got my fair share of creep encounters on there as well. On this particular night, a friend of my best friend at the time, whom I'd met online, had found me on Omegle. They knew it was me due to the screen name that I use for just about everything. However, I never formally spoke to this person. They were a little older, and thought it would be hilarious to scare me. They, along with our mutual friend behind the scenes, used personal information and sort of glitched the font through the text feature, effectively beginning to scare the piss out of me. Eventually, I'd had enough. I slammed my laptop shut and nervously shot my friend a message, telling him about my encounter. He urged me not to panic too much, knowing it was truly nothing to worry about, but I remained on edge. So, when my small, almost always silent dog, Abby, started barking viciously at the door, I immediately felt sweat in my palms and my heart racing. It was already pitch black outside. In the front yard, there was a single streetlight across the street, and in the back, we had about 2.5 acres of wooded land. I attempted to comfort Abby, but she was the most terrified and on guard that I'd ever seen her. Even to this day, she never growled like that. I didn't know why, but I desperately wanted to know what was out there. I thought for sure I'd see a horrible creature or person like described in the Omegle chat before. They had described my house and my life, so surely it was them outside. I don't know why I opened that door. It wasn't even locked, due to how low the crime rate was in our area. But despite Abby's standing fur and angry growling, and despite knowing something bad could be out there, I turned the knob. I felt like I just had to. I gripped the old, cold knob and opened the door quickly. At first, there was nothing. I stepped onto our small porch slowly, sighing in premature relief, before I heard a crunch. The crunch of leaves beneath me. Under the porch, I froze, and right as I did, a terrible creature, person, I'm not sure, bolted out from under the porch. It looked exactly like the old classic photo of the rake. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Google image the rake. Imagine this, but much longer, lankier limbs, and the bones showed much more. Like someone with severe anorexia, but running on all fours. From what I could see in the very little amount of lighting, it was completely hairless. Its limbs were long, and you could see the scrawny, malnourished frame as it ran. It ran so damn fast, I couldn't move, I couldn't scream. Not until Abby darted after the creature down the road. That's when I began to panic. I screamed and cried for Abby to come back. And right as I did, I heard a horrible, monstrous screeching and then a loud yelp from Abby. Then watched her tiny body running full speed back towards me, up the porch and inside. I didn't stop to take in the scenery anymore. I ran inside behind her and slammed the door shut. I locked it and began checking every window as I cried and questioned reality itself. As I did this, my little sister came into the living room, asking why I was yelling and crying. I simply told her Abby had almost run out in front of a car, but that she was okay. Upon further examination, I found that to luckily be the truth. The creature didn't hurt her, so I assumed that she realised the major size difference when she tried to face it and got scared. I kept it to myself as not to terrify my siblings, but I immediately told my mum the whole story when she got home. She tried to calm me down, saying that it could have been a deer or another random woodland animal. When I called my best friend, he felt responsible for my intense fear. As I cried into the phone, he told me about his friend trying to scare me. The friend even shot me a message to apologise profusely. However, I assured them that what they did was nothing compared to what I saw out there. I know what I saw that day, and I will always stand by it. Whatever was lurking under our porch looked deformed, non-human, and ran faster than anything I'd ever seen in person. Whatever was under our porch has made me believe that anything can potentially exist. This next bit is just extra, but it reminded me of how much this experience affected me. I also believe whatever may be out there could come back. Just the other day, I let my current dog Daisy outside. It was extremely dark, just like that night. As I let her out, something shot from under the porch and began to fight with her. I have very bad eyesight and didn't have my glasses, so no porch light. So when my dog and the other animal just went silent, I ran to the bottom of the steps, ready to face what my mind kept telling me was this monster from my past. I called her and began sobbing and shaking. I was sure the creature came back, but Daisy wouldn't come out of the darkness and I heard nothing. I had to get my mother-in-law and her boyfriend, who brought flashlights and an axe outside in a hurry. I told them I thought it was another large dog, as to not seem more unhinged than I already did at that moment. In the end, it was a possum. My dog had simply ignored it once it played dead. I guess she just wanted to keep me on my toes. I know this isn't crucial to the main story, but it made me realise just how real that night truly was for me. I was so scared to relive it, with less fortunate outcomes. One might blame it on generalised anxiety, or for my overall love of the scary and supernatural, but I know it had to have happened. Has anyone else seen anything like what I'm describing? I'm genuinely curious. So, this is a true story that happened to me a little bit ago. I get sick quite often as my immune system is jank and I have horrible acid reflux. So I stay home alone a lot while my mum and stepdad go to work. I got picked up early from school a few weeks ago because I wasn't feeling good. And my mum told me to make sure to walk the dog outside for a bit. Alright, no big deal. I sit and rest while he plays, a normal thing that I do. So as I'm sitting there, my dog starts to act weird. He's a Chihuahua puppy, and if you have one or have been around one, you know they're weird little dudes. So I didn't think anything of it, but then he acts weird as he barks, and this time he was just shying towards me and whimpering. Strange, but again, he's weird, so I didn't think anything of it. But then I start hearing these weird sounds in my woods. Now for context, my house is surrounded by thick woods, and the front is a highway. Other than that, I'm pretty secluded, and there's woods everywhere and they're pretty deep. So I step on my porch, and that's when I really hear what's making him so nervous. It sounds like an animal is hurt, like a really, really hurt puppy or fox, or something akin to that. So I, an idiot, start walking towards the woods to see if I can see the animal and make sure it's okay. As I'm getting closer, the dog is losing his shit and trying to bark at me to go back. That's when it started to sound less and less like an animal and more like something trying to sound like one. It sounded like someone with a scratchy throat trying to make a whimpering puppy or dog sound. Freaky as hell. Maybe my dog is onto something, so I scoop him up and we go back inside for the rest of the day. The next incident was about a week after that. I was calling my dog to come eat his breakfast. Again, I was home alone and sick. And I yell, "Here, Brian," that's my dog's name. And then I hear my mother's voice, "Come here, Brian, here boy," in my woods. Holy shit. I call my mum and she insists that she's at work and hadn't been home since she left. I call my dad in tears, and he's a very logical man, and says it was either my voice echoing or my imagination, but I know what I heard. There's no way she could have pranked me either, because I called her work and they confirmed that she was there and had been there the whole time. I'm an extremely spiritual witch and believe in all kinds of spirits. I even work with 2 deities and practice witchcraft often. At this point, I'm open to whatever explanation there is, but I know this was paranormal. I'm like a magnet for this stuff. If you have any idea what it could have been, then please let me know.
Most people here are probably aware of the story of Ed Gein. For those that aren't, he was a small town handyman who confessed to murdering 2 women, in addition to stealing numerous bodies from their graves. One of the women he murdered was the owner of the local hardware store, where he shot and killed her. That building still stands today. My story happened 20 plus years ago. I live in that same town, and it was just before Thanksgiving. I'd already started decorating my place for Christmas, and I needed to replace some of the lights, so I just made a quick trip to the hardware store for a couple of boxes. I knew the building was rumoured to be haunted by the murdered woman, but I never put too much stock into it. I was in the back area where they kept the Christmas decorations, and I was about to grab some lights when I heard someone nearby saying something about antifreeze. I turned my head and saw a woman walking by with a massive gunshot wound in her head. She then suddenly disappeared. I just stood there in shock for a good minute. When I finally made my way to the front of the store to pay for the lights, the guy behind the counter took one look at my face and simply said, "You saw her, didn't you?"
My father has encountered a Bigfoot a couple of times, so these are his stories that I'm sharing today. Let me quickly preface this by saying that my dad believed in the existence of Bigfoot before either of the incidents took place. And while I do have experience in dealing with the supernatural, ghosts and demons, etc., I have never witnessed anything to do with this particular creature. Granted, at the time, I did live in a small town with no massive forest nearby, so it wasn't exactly surprising. On with the story. My first encounter took place while my father was working a job as a pizza delivery guy. He was making his last delivery of the night when it happened. He was the only one on the road since he was using back roads and it was close to 1 in the morning. The pizza joint had closed at midnight, but someone had made a last minute order. Woodland bordered either side of the road as he drove, dense and dark. Then a deer ran out into the road, the headlights causing the dumb animal to freeze. My dad had totaled a few cars in the past, thanks to the woodland creatures, and was determined not to do it again. He swerved around the deer, since the lane for oncoming traffic was thankfully empty, and slammed on the brakes in order to look at the still animal through a rearview mirror, checking if he'd clipped it at all during the chaos. And that's when he saw it. There was a deafening crack just beyond the tree line, and then there was suddenly a huge tree trunk flying out of the forest with startling speed. The log brutally slammed into the stunned deer, killing it instantly. My dad idled there in shock as he stared in disbelief at the dark smear that used to be the deer. Then he saw something big moving in the tree line on the side of the road from where the log had been tossed from, just far enough away from the red light from the tail lights of his car that didn't reach. Just far enough away that the red light from the tail lights of his car didn't reach whatever it was. But even then, he told me that he could still tell that it was massive. After that, he quickly regained motor function and got the hell out of there. He said that on his way back from finishing the delivery, he went down the same road to see what was left of what had occurred, the only evidence being a large pool of red on the ground and some chunks of bark. He didn't even dare to slow down while passing through and kept driving fast until he was back on the highway. The second encounter happened just a couple of months later, when my dad had moved to the tiny town of Askov, MN. He had about 30 acres of forested property and a long dirt driveway leading up to the main house. He was at the end of said driveway one night since it was peaceful and had good service there. The front of his car was facing a field and he had his vehicle off, headlights and all, just overall enjoying the calm night. He'd been out there for a while, so his eyes were already adjusted to the darkness, and the light from the moon was enough for him to see the clearing across from his position perfectly. Glancing up from his phone, he spotted a group of deer run out of the surrounding tree line and into the field, bounding across the grass as if trying to escape something. He watched, not even daring to breathe, as a huge figure stepped out into the field where the deer had come from. He told me that it had to have been at least 10 feet tall and covered from head to toe in long dark hair. Then, as if sensing his gaze, it looked up, its red eyes staring seemingly right at him. Then he woke up, startling from where he had nodded off in the car while playing games on his phone. Now, I realised that might seem like a bit of a cheap story because it was just a dream, but it doesn't end there. He sat in his car at the end of the driveway, processing his odd dream. He saw a group of deer run out of the surrounding tree line and into the field, bounding across from the grass as if trying to escape something. Recalling his dream and what happened next, he quickly started his car and drove back to the house, where he stayed for the rest of the night. My father has no reason to lie to me about such things, since he knows I'm an avid believer myself, so I believed him when he told my sister and I. Now, take this story with a grain of salt, but just know that there are things out there that are much more terrifying than humans. Stay safe.